What if your anxious thoughts aren't the problem, but a cover-up? What if, beneath the constant scanning, the obsessive worry, and the racing mind, there is a force desperate to be remembered? For many, anxiety feels like a life lived on the edge, always anticipating the next blow, always bracing for what might go wrong. We're taught to reason with these thoughts, to correct them, reframe them, manage them. But what if anxiety isn't a cognitive glitch to be fixed, but a buried instinct, a frozen energy, a forgotten protector? And what if the fear is just a gate? You're watching Archetypal Wisdom. Join me in exploring the symbolic truths and mysteries of humankind. Remember to like and subscribe. Now, back to the video. Let me tell you a story. There was a boy who loved to wander through the forest. He explored with abandon and joy. Each day a new adventure, each day an opportunity to discover. One day he stumbled upon an enormous figure, which sat facing away from him. The boy was scared but curious. He slowly approached the figure to get a closer look. As he inched towards the looming figure, the boy stepped onto an old leaf and the figure spun around. The boy was horrified to see an ogre staring back at him, furious and ferocious. It charged at the boy, but just before the ogre made contact, the crone of the woods appeared. The crone was a dark, mysterious figure with a fierce and intimidating presence. The boy was paralyzed with fear. The ogre continued charging and the crone cast a spell on the boy, freezing his heart. The boy fell unconscious. When he came to, the ogre and crone were gone, and the boy's memory had blurred. The boy, now a man, felt a distance between himself and the world. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen at any moment, yet he didn't know what. He was always scanning, trying to find the source of danger. It distracted him constantly, pulling him away from those he loved. He felt terribly alone. The man's suffering mirrors the core symptoms of Generalized Anxiety Disorder, GAD, relentless worry, hypervigilance, obsessive fear of what might go wrong, and painful isolation. So what exactly is thought to be the cause and treatment of generalized anxiety? Mainstream psychology gives us two useful perspectives. From the sociocultural lens, chronic anxiety often emerges from environments where safety was compromised, whether emotional, physical, or financial. When the world feels unpredictable or threatening, the nervous system adapts by remaining on high alert. Hypervigilance becomes a survival strategy. The humanistic perspective goes deeper into the psyche. It shows us that anxiety is often born from the repression of the true self. Children raised in highly critical or emotionally rigid environments internalize the judgment they receive. Instead of expressing what they feel, they shape themselves into what they think will keep them safe or accepted. Over time, this self-denial creates a fracture, and anxiety grows in the space between who they are and who they've been forced to become. In fact, Carl Jung stated that neurosis can be viewed as a substitute or proxy for legitimate suffering. Neurosis is an older psychological term that broadly refers to mental distress or dysfunction, such as chronic anxiety, obsessive worry, or irrational fear without a loss of touch with reality. This is a curious insight and seems to indicate that underneath the anxiety and obsessive fearful projections is a genuine wound, and thus generalized anxiety disorder could be considered the outgrowth of that legitimate suffering. If we take this seriously, then it should give serious pause to one of the most common treatments for GAD, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. CBT is essentially a top-down approach. It considers the cause of anxiety as the result of distorted thinking. Therefore, the focus is on watching the distorted thinking carefully and learning to correct the thoughts by the use of reason, and practice behaviors that disprove their validity. The theory is that doing this will reduce anxiety. CBT can provide useful tools for interrupting anxious thought loops, and for many it brings relief. But it's ultimately a method of management, and that doesn't address the root cause. But what if there is a way to actually transform the experience of anxiety and not just manage it? Both the sociocultural and humanistic perspectives point to formative experiences involving unhealthy expressions of anger. From the sociocultural lens, this often takes the form of emotional volatility or physical punishment in the environment. The humanistic perspective highlights the impact of hypercritical or emotionally rigid caregivers, both patterns typically rooted in unintegrated or misdirected anger. Therefore, the individual's experience of anger is a terrifying one, and they learn to repress their own experience of it. What if this is the so-called legitimate suffering? What if underneath all the obsessive worry and anxiety there's a truth behind it all? One that's been too frightening to face. Not the fear of danger, but the fear of your own power and not knowing what to do with it. One day the man found himself back in those same woods. He walked through the dense forest until eventually he found himself facing the crone once again. He was taken aback, not sure who she was. The crone recognized the man immediately. She could see the man was drained and burdened. She stepped from the shadows, and as she neared him, placed a hand over his heart. A slow, unfamiliar heat began to rise within him. Her expression softened and became less intense, less fierce. She now had the appearance of a healer. "I'm sorry. I froze this to protect you, but it can't continue. Please prepare yourself." The man, confused and disoriented, stood in silence. The healer continued to warm the man's heart, and he felt a sudden, overwhelming anguish, and the ogre appeared before him once again. The man wanted to run, but the healer stopped him. "Stay with it." The man looked back up at the ogre's face and stared deep into the ogre's eyes and felt rage. The rage surged, hot and relentless. A fire rose inside him, blurring his vision. For the first time, he did not shrink. He did not retreat. The fire did not consume him, it clarified him. As the man felt the rage flowing through him, the ogre's appearance began to transform. The man suddenly fell to his knees, overcome with grief. The ogre's appearance had now completely changed. He appeared as a kind and friendly giant. The giant sat with the man, protecting him and the healer while the man grieved. The man eventually settled and felt a deep peace wash over him. The healer and the kind giant followed him wherever he went. They formed a circle around him, the wisdom to feel, the strength to protect, and the self once frozen, now alive. For the first time in his life, he felt safe in the world. This story suggests that GAD may stem from repressed archetypal forces, especially the suppressed energy of anger. So let's take a look at this story and unpack the archetypal narrative at play. At the outset, the boy is attacked by an ogre. The ogre's attack symbolizes a confrontation with the unintegrated masculine, a raw, chaotic force of authority turned violent. Archetypally, the ogre can be understood as a derivative of the father in his most primitive and destructive form. Not a protector or guide, but a figure twisted by domination, rage, and fear. This moment captures the psychological rupture that occurs when someone, especially in early life, is overwhelmed by a force they were meant to trust. When the inner relationship with the father archetype is unconscious or repressed, it doesn't disappear, it distorts, re-emerging as a monster rather than a mentor. The positive relationship with the father archetype contains this same power, but it's wielded with responsibility and protection. The boy is wounded in his relationship to the father archetype in his formative years, and thus the deeper psychological principle of protective power and inner authority. This brings forth the emergence of the crone, who can be understood as a derivative of the mother archetype. She freezes the boy's heart to protect him from the primal force of the ogre. This is her attempt to keep him safe, but it leaves the boy cut off from both the world and himself, trapped in constant worry and fear, and retreating into isolation. In other words, the boy, now a man, is stuck in relation to the negative pole of the mother archetype, the overprotective quality which is leading to isolation, avoidance, and repression. It is only when the man goes seeking and returns to the forest that he makes contact again with the crone, willing to step out of their aggressive dynamic. At this pivotal moment, the man gains access to the crone's wisdom and healing, the positive pole of the mother archetype, which enables him to fully feel and integrate his pain. Through this emotional reckoning, he begins to reconnect with the father archetype, starting by confronting and understanding its negative aspect. As this relationship transforms, he regains access to the father's positive pole, the grounded, protective power he had been cut off from. The man eventually has the wise healer and kind giant with him as companions. In other words, he has developed his relationship to the positive pole of the mother and father archetype within his psyche. Now that he has a more integrated relationship with these two archetypal forces, he feels secure again. He can step out into the world confidently and not be plagued by obsessive worry and fear. He is ultimately a united self. Previously, the anger in him, which is supposed to serve as a protective force, was lost, and instead of having a developed and mature feeling function, it was frozen, meaning repressed and avoided. This led to constant projections of fear stemming from the lack of an integrated protective function, and therefore needing to remain in a state of regressive avoidance. This pattern of being frozen, retreating from power, and learning to feel again isn't new. This archetypal theme can be found in mythology across time. Just like our man in the forest, it wasn't reason that healed him, it was relationship. With the pain, with the rage, with the forgotten protector inside, who was never the enemy, but the part of him that waited to return. You've been watching Archetypal Wisdom. Remember to like and subscribe. Stay wise.